Have you ever noticed that some of the smartest people you know seem to disappear without warning? One day they're replying to every message. They show up at family gatherings. They make conversations feel effortless. They laugh, they listen, and somehow they always understand what other people are feeling. Then something changes. They stop texting first. They quietly leave group chats. They decline invitations they used to enjoy. Their social media goes silent. And before long, people begin asking the same question. What happened to them? Most assume the worst. Maybe they're depressed, maybe they're arrogant now, maybe they think they're better than everyone else. But psychology suggests something far more interesting. Sometimes, disappearing isn't about hating people, it's about protecting something much deeper. Because highly intelligent people often experience the world differently. Not because they're smarter in every way, but because their minds process social experiences, emotions, and patterns with unusual depth. And that difference can slowly pull them away from places where they once felt comfortable. But here's the strange part. Many of them don't even realize it's happening. The distance grows one unanswered message at a time, one canceled plan, one quiet evening spent alone, until isolation quietly becomes their new normal. So why does this happen? Why would someone who genuinely cares about others slowly disappear from their lives? The answer has less to do with personality and much more to do with how the brain handles information, emotions, and human connection. And by the end of this video, you may discover that this behavior isn't always a sign of loneliness. Sometimes it's the mind searching for peace. Imagine walking into a crowded room. People are talking, music is playing. Several conversations are happening at once. Most people naturally focus on whoever they're speaking with. But some minds can't help noticing everything. The forced smile from someone across the room, the awkward silence after a joke, the person pretending to enjoy the conversation while secretly checking the exit. It's almost as if their attention works like a radar, constantly scanning for hidden details that everyone else overlooks. At first, this sounds like a gift. After all, who wouldn't want to understand people better? But psychology offers a different perspective. Your brain has limited energy. Every face you analyze, every tone of voice you interpret, every tiny inconsistency you notice consumes mental resources. Researchers studying attention have found that our brains constantly filter information to avoid overload. But highly perceptive people often allow far more information to pass through those filters. It's like trying to run dozens of computer programs at the same time. Eventually, even the fastest computer begins to slow down. The same thing can happen inside the human mind. That's why social situations that energize one person can quietly exhaust another, not because they dislike people, because their brains rarely stop processing them. Now here's where things become even more interesting. Most people believe intelligent individuals avoid others because they're antisocial, but psychology tells a different story. Many actually crave meaningful connection. They simply become tired of conversations that never go beneath the surface. Think about the last time someone asked, "How are you?" You probably answered, "I'm fine." They smiled. You smiled. And both of you moved on. Nothing was wrong with that conversation, but nothing really happened either. For someone whose mind constantly searches for patterns, meaning, and emotional depth, repeating interactions like this can slowly become emotionally empty. It's like reading the same page of a book over and over again, hoping a new chapter will suddenly appear. Eventually, curiosity fades, not because they dislike the people involved, but because their minds keep searching for conversations that rarely happen. And when those moments become rare enough, silence begins to feel surprisingly comfortable. This is where many people misunderstand them. Friends often assume they're pulling away because they're angry. Family members think they're becoming cold. Coworkers assume they're simply too busy. But inside, something very different is happening. Imagine carrying an invisible backpack. Every awkward conversation, every fake smile, every emotional misunderstanding, every situation where you felt like you couldn't be yourself adds another stone. At first, the weight barely matters. Then months pass, sometimes years. Without realizing it, the backpack becomes heavier than the person carrying it. Eventually, spending another evening alone feels lighter than carrying that weight into another social gathering. And here's something fascinating. And neuroscience suggests that our brains remember emotionally significant experiences more strongly than ordinary ones. Negative social experiences often leave deeper impressions because the brain treats them as lessons for future survival. In other words, your mind isn't trying to make you lonely. It's trying to protect you from repeating emotional pain. But that protection comes with a hidden cost, because every time someone withdraws to avoid disappointment, their world quietly becomes smaller, and what begins as self-protection can slowly turn into self-isolation. But that's only part of the story, because there's another psychological reason intelligent people disappear, one that's deeply connected to how they see themselves, how they think, and why being alone can sometimes feel more rewarding than being surrounded by others. And once you understand that, their silence starts to make perfect sense. Because the deeper reason isn't that intelligent people enjoy being alone. It's that over time, solitude begins to feel more honest than many of the interactions they're surrounded by. That might sound harsh, but psychology paints a much more balanced picture. Most people assume that if someone spends a lot of time alone, they're avoiding life. Yet research on personality and cognition suggests something surprising. People who naturally enjoy deep thinking often use solitude as a way to process information, organize emotions, and make sense of their experiences. To them, being alone isn't always an escape. Sometimes it's where they feel most mentally alive. Think about it. After a long day filled with meetings, messages, and conversations, one person relaxes by calling friends. Another sits by a window with a cup of coffee, watching the rain without saying a word. Neither response is wrong. They're simply restoring their mental energy in different ways. For highly reflective people, silence often becomes that place of recovery. It's like plugging a phone into a charger. From the outside, nothing seems to be happening. But inside, everything is being restored. Here's where things become even more interesting. Most people think intelligence is mainly about solving problems. But psychology suggests that one of its hidden side effects is the inability to stop searching for them. Highly analytical minds don't just notice what's happening, they constantly ask why. Why did that person suddenly change their tone? Why did that conversation feel different today? Why do people say one thing but mean another? Why do the same relationship patterns keep repeating? Their thoughts rarely stay on the surface. Instead, one question creates another, then another, and another. Neuroscientists sometimes describe the brain's default mode network as a system that becomes active when we're not focused on a specific task. It's heavily involved in self-reflection, memory, and imagining different possibilities. For reflective people, this network can stay unusually active. That means even after everyone else has moved on from an awkward conversation, their brain is still replaying it, not because they're obsessed, because it's still searching for meaning. Imagine opening dozens of browser tabs on your computer. Each one represents a conversation, a decision, a memory, a regret, a possibility. Most people eventually close those tabs, but some minds leave them open. By the end of the day, the system isn't broken, it's simply overloaded. And when that happens, the easiest solution isn't adding more conversations, it's reducing them. Unfortunately, this creates another hidden problem. The less someone socializes, the easier it becomes to stay isolated. Behavioral psychology explains that habits grow stronger through repetition. Every time staying home feels more peaceful than attending another gathering, the brain quietly learns something. This feels safer. Then it repeats the behavior, not because it's always healthier, because it's predictable. Our brains love predictability. It reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty requires energy. Over weeks, months, or even years, choosing solitude becomes almost automatic. It no longer feels like a decision. It feels like part of who they are. That's the strange thing about habits. They slowly transform into identity. If you're enjoying this exploration into how the mind really works, consider subscribing, because every week we uncover the hidden psychological patterns behind everyday human behavior. Now imagine someone sends a message. "Hey, we haven't seen you in a while. You should come out with us." They read it. They even smile. They genuinely appreciate being invited. Then they put the phone down. Minutes turn into hours. Hours become days. Eventually, they never reply. To the outside world, it looks rude, maybe even arrogant. But inside, a completely different conversation is happening. What if I don't have the energy? What if I can't connect like I used to? What if I leave feeling even more exhausted? Psychologists call this anticipatory thinking. The brain begins predicting future emotional outcomes before they happen. And when it expects exhaustion more than enjoyment, avoiding the situation starts to feel logical. It's not always fear. It's mental cost-benefit analysis happening beneath awareness. The brain quietly asks, is this worth the energy? Sometimes the answer becomes no, not because the people are bad, because emotional resources feel limited. But here's the belief that psychology completely turns upside down. Most people think intelligent individuals disappear because they've stopped caring about others. In reality, many disappear because they care too deeply. They notice tension before anyone says a word. They sense disappointment hidden behind polite smiles. They remember promises that everyone else forgot. They replay moments that others barely noticed. This heightened awareness can become emotionally exhausting. Imagine carrying a radio that never switches off. Most people hear one station. You hear 20 at once. Eventually, silence becomes more comforting than constant noise. That's why being alone often feels peaceful. Not because nothing is happening, but because for the first time all day, the mind finally becomes quiet. And yet, that same silence can slowly build invisible walls. Walls that feel safe from the inside, but lonely from the outside. Because while solitude restores the mind, too much of it can quietly disconnect the heart. And this brings us to the most important question of all. If intelligent people aren't running away from others, what are they really searching for? The answer has less to do with intelligence and everything to do with meaning. That's where the final piece of this psychological puzzle begins. What they're searching for isn't isolation, it's alignment. A place where they don't have to explain why they think differently. A conversation that doesn't end after small talk. A friendship where silence isn't awkward. A relationship where curiosity is welcomed instead of misunderstood. Because here's something most people never realize. Highly intelligent people rarely disappear from everyone. They disappear from environments that no longer feel authentic. That distinction changes everything. Imagine trying to tune into a radio station that's full of static. You can still hear voices. You can still make out parts of the conversation. But eventually, the noise becomes more exhausting than the silence. That's how many deeply reflective people experience relationships that lack honesty, curiosity, or emotional depth. They don't necessarily reject people. They reject constant psychological noise. Now, this doesn't mean intelligent people are somehow better than everyone else. That's one of the biggest myths surrounding intelligence. In fact, psychology shows the opposite. The more someone understands the complexity of life, the more aware they often become of their own limitations. Researchers have even observed something known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. In simple terms, people with limited knowledge often overestimate what they know, while those with greater knowledge are more likely to recognize how much they still don't understand. That's why some of the most thoughtful people seem surprisingly humble. They ask more questions than they answer. They listen more than they speak. They hesitate before making absolute judgments. And because they see so many perspectives, they often struggle to find places where conversations feel genuine rather than performative. Think about a moment when you shared something deeply personal. Maybe you expected someone to truly listen. Instead, they interrupted with advice before understanding your experience, or they changed the subject after only a few seconds. Nothing terrible happened, but something quietly broke. Trust. Moments like these rarely seem significant on their own, yet the brain remembers emotional mismatches. Not because it's keeping score, because it's constantly updating its internal map of who feels emotionally safe. You could think of it like a lighthouse. Every meaningful interaction adds another beam of light. Every disappointing one makes the coastline a little harder to see. Eventually, the brain starts steering away from waters that no longer feel safe. From the outside, it looks like withdrawal. Inside, it feels like navigation. But here's the hidden danger. The same mind that protects you can also trap you. The more selective someone becomes, the fewer opportunities they have to discover people who actually understand them. And that's where isolation quietly changes shape. At first, it's peaceful, then it's comfortable. Eventually, it becomes familiar. The human brain loves familiarity, even when familiarity isn't making us happy. Behavioral psychologists often describe this as reinforcement. If avoiding social situations reduces stress in the short term, the brain learns to repeat that behavior, but it doesn't calculate the long-term cost. Weeks become months, months become years. One day, the person who once loved meaningful conversations realizes they don't know who to call anymore, not because nobody cared, because distance grew so slowly that neither side noticed until it became normal. This is where everything changes. Most people believe the opposite of loneliness is being surrounded by others. But psychology suggests something much deeper. The opposite of loneliness is feeling understood. You can sit at a crowded dinner table and still feel completely alone, or you can spend one quiet afternoon with someone who truly listens and feel deeply connected. Intelligent people aren't usually searching for more people. They're searching for fewer masks, for conversations where curiosity matters more than appearances, where questions matter more than pretending to have all the answers, where they don't have to shrink parts of themselves just to fit in. And when they finally find those people, something remarkable happens. They stop disappearing. Not because they've changed, because they've finally found a place where they no longer feel the need to hide. So, if someone in your life has quietly drifted away, resist the urge to assume they no longer care. Their silence may not be a rejection. It may be a sign that they're emotionally exhausted, that they're searching for clarity, that they're trying to protect a mind that's been carrying too much for too long. And if you're the one who has slowly disappeared, maybe this video isn't telling you to force yourself back into every crowded room. Maybe it's inviting you to ask a different question, not how do I become more social, but where do I feel most understood? Because disappearing isn't always about leaving people behind. Sometimes it's about leaving behind the version of yourself that was constantly trying to fit into places where you never truly belonged. And perhaps the greatest sign of intelligence isn't knowing when to walk away. It's knowing when to return to the people who make you feel seen without asking you to become someone else. Because in the end, the smartest minds aren't searching for a bigger audience. They're searching for a place where they no longer have to disappear.